Hi, welcome back to the second installment of my informal YouTube television program. My name is Hicks, and I'm here today with a really special guest, Rafiq, aka Robert Sean Lewis. And he's the author of this great new book, Days of Shock, Days of Wonder. It's all about his quest for interfaith truth and the truth about 9/11, and it talks about interfaith experiences with God and meditation and Sufism and some of the great experiences of the world religions. So we're going to get into that, but Rafiq, welcome to my little program.
Thank you, Sander.
I'm so happy we're finally able to find each other. You're in Mexico, I'm in New York City, and yet here we are having a conversation between friends.
I love it.
Why don't we start, though, borrowing one of the great practices of David Meiswinkle. He started his show with me with a moment of silence, prayer, and meditation. It is Holy Saturday in the Christian and Catholic traditions. I happen to have a big candle here on my desk, and so
here in my little town, they have the Stations of the Cross set up.
Yeah.
And they're coming by in the parades, and you can hear them singing. It's really beautiful.
That's great. That reminds me of my experiences in New Mexico and Taos, and the processions there with the monstrance and the body of Christ and this beautiful big gold. Talk about incredible theater.
Yes. Yeah, theater. We'll come back to that.
Yeah, exactly. But for now, just to kind of help us clear our minds and those of the audience and people that are going to be experiencing this show, let's just have a moment of silence and bring in a reverence for the truth and a reverence for the path of the prophetic calling to truth. And let's just why don't we just take 30 seconds and just have kind of a moment of prayer and meditation together, shall we?
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, great.
But I will begin with the Sufi invocation if I can.
Please.
Bismillah, Yaraman, Yarahim. Bismillah, Yaraman, Yarahim. Living with the Sufis, you realize the sacred and the profane are always entwined. So that's what we're doing this morning, bringing that awareness into this conversation. So Bismillah, Yaraman, Yarahim.
Okay, great. Let's come back now, and why don't you tell us what the translation of Bismillah Elohim?
Everybody knows Bismillah from
Bohemian Rhapsody by Queen. Bismillah, no, right?
Yeah. So it just means, praise Allah, or in the name of Allah. And when we would pass the chai or pass the Chillum with the Sufis, they would often say Bismillah before they partook of anything.
And explain to people who might not know what a Chillum is, what a Chillum is.
It's made of ceramic, and it's just a simple cone. And they put a little stone inside of it to keep the marijuana or tobacco mixed with hashish that you're smoking from falling all the way through. And you put a little bit of cotton. They would take the cotton bandages that they would buy at the pharmacy in the street, take strips of them and put them around the bottom as a filter. Smoke your chillum. The Sufis combine hashish use with the zikr, which is just more of the Arabic chanting that I was doing. When I paddleboard here, I use that zikr to increase my trance experience. So I start off, and I may not get the pronunciation right, so I apologize to to any Arabic speakers, but Hasbi Rabbi Zullallah Mawfi Galfi Kairullah, Nur Muhammad Sallallahu Ila Ilaha Illallah, Ila Ilaha Illallahu, Muhammad Rasulallah. And who is the highest name for the divine? All of these are just names for the divine. And fascinating, it doesn't just show up there. It showed up on a bulletin board in town recently. Some meditation practice somebody doing. It's all about who. It's H-U. And I'm like, well, there it is again. Right? So
that's great.
And they combine it with hashish, and then they go out into the streets and they perform these amazing feats of what could appear to be self-punishment. They pierce their flesh, often all the way through their cheeks, and no blood is drawn, which shows a great knowledge of our physiology. But
yeah. It's funny. The very first time I got into chanting was through 9/11 Truth. In LA, we were doing, the We Are Change group in LA is very active, and this was 5 years ago or 6 years ago. I was living in LA. I don't smoke marijuana anymore, but at the time I was, and so we smoked up after giving away free DVDs on the Sunset Strip for hours, and then this woman, Emily, said, "I'm going to chant now. Do you want to come?" And I was like, well, sure. And she was going to SGI, and we did chanting there. And so, yeah, I can see how the Chillum and chanting go together quite well. Then, of course, I got into Zen, which was a step above, and there was an AA meeting. And then I was kind of like, you know what, I'm going to go a little bit higher in my own practice. And anyway, it's what I needed to do at the time. So let's talk. Let's talk about the way 9/11 Truth intersects with your very interesting calling to explore, a kind of a greater truth. I mean, there is a greater truth than just 9/11 Truth, and that's, I think, the unity of the world's religions. This compassion. If we can have more compassion and open-mindedness for Islam, Sufism, Buddhism, Christianity, I think that's the really revolutionary, illusion-shattering quest. So that's kind of a long-winded way to ask you a question, and you can answer it any way you like.
Yeah, I agree with what you said about the unity of all religions. I wrote about this in my first book, and I wrote that first book because the dominant idea that we have of God, the operative idea in our culture, is that God is an individual, separate from creation and separate from us, and probably separate from nature, too, by that equation. And this idea allows us to get into wars in the name of religion, to kill in the name of God. And so that, for me, was an indication that our religions were not serving our highest ideals. Our highest ideals, as we express them again and again, are in the terms you've just used. We know that compassion feels right. We know that peace. Look how many people took to the streets all over the world against the Iraq war. We know that peace is what the collective wants. So I wrote this book, bringing to the fore in every religion the other idea of the divine, the pantheistic idea, which is not to be confused with polytheistic, which means many gods. Pantheistic means nothing but God. The one energy animating the universe, the one energy that shows up in quantum physics again and again, is that which you cannot observe without changing. But what else do we know in our experience that you can't observe without changing? Your reflection in the mirror. In quantum physics, we're looking at ourselves. We're looking at our own energy. We observe it to behave as a particle, and it will. We observe it to behave as a wave, and it will, because of our input. So we understand now that science and religion have really reached the same place. They cannot step out of that which they are observing. If the divine is in everything, we cannot step out of the divine. We cannot ask God to come and intervene in itself. It's already in itself. There's nothing but the divine. So I find this idea in all religions, and in Christianity it comes in the idea of the Holy Spirit. And there's this great conversation between Jesus and his disciples at the end. He's like, forget the Father and the Son. The Holy Spirit, it's in you. And they're like, we don't get it. So you go and look at the book of wisdom, the book of Sophia, and it's all the things that he told Mary Magdalene. And he told Mary Magdalene the mystical ideas of the divine, the stuff that a lot of people claim that Jesus learned when he went to India, in fact, during those missing years of his history. And the disciples in that book bicker among themselves, saying, why would he have told a woman those things and not tell them to us? Because she was more intuitive, and he understood that she understood. That's how I read that character in that part of the story. So, to get back to your question about how this intersects with 9/11 truth, that first book I wrote was a book of theory. But where is the practice? How do we practice compassion? How do we live peacefully in the world? And what 9/11 asked me to do was not live peacefully in the world in a cave, not live peacefully in the world in some kind of state of higher detachment as though the world is profane and then there's this higher sacred dimension of the world. If the divine is in everything, there's nothing but the sacred. And this is what the Indigenous demonstrate. Their shamans don't go live in caves. They visit people in the village every day. The Baba that I lived with in India, they're called the wild Sufis because they're like Indigenous people. They have the chanting, the drumming, the use of marijuana and hashish for trance states. And that Baba, every village we went to, he would go to little houses all the way through and visit and sit and give his time because he knows that that's where the magic is, that's where the divine is, the opportunities are. So I don't want to get off path, but so for me, confronting 9/11 put me in the trenches of confronting evil, confronting feelings of betrayal, confronting, honestly, anger. And I realized very quickly, and I knew it before in other ways, it shows up in the book in other contexts. I knew that it was very hard to walk this so-called path of peace, and at the same time deal with this stuff on a daily basis. And so that's the tension that arises in the book.
Yes. Yeah, I found in my own experiences that you absolutely need, you look at, back away from just 9/11 for a second and just look at people who get really super into the abysmal levels of evil with deep state politics overall, Bush family corruption overall. People like the late, great Mike Ruppert or Danny Casolaro or Gary Webb. They
bless his heart, poor guy. Gary Webb.
What's that?
Bless his heart, Gary Webb.
Bless his heart. The guy that exposed the CIA connections to cocaine trafficking, leading to funding for the Contras in the 80s and stuff, and they just seem to have gotten crushed by their quest. They didn't seem to have the tools. Of course, some of the suicides are questionable.
It's 2 bullet wounds.
Yeah. I mean, it could have happened. It's uncertain. With Mike Ruppert, it seems like the depression and his battle with alcohol might have. And probably subsumed him. And I know that he also was struggling with sobriety, and I'm trying to build up your point that like this calling to develop a spiritual practice is a very necessary tool if you're going to take on the 9/11 truth cause or any other cause that's this taboo. It is a taboo topic, and so that you don't get subsumed by the evil. It seems that I think your book is really important because I think it can seed a next generation of activists who are also friendly to the world's religions and can take strength from God or truth or spiritual practice.
Or certainly something that's larger than ourselves and that connects us.
Yeah, a higher power of our own understanding.
Yeah. I would say a deeper power. Higher suggests a hierarchy. That's, I think, a holdover from our Christian ideas.
Yeah, I'm quoting a little bit of Orthodox AA literature when I say higher power. But yeah, deeper power is fine too. Deeper within, that's great. Beyond the ego.
That's our birthright.
Great.
But it's also there in nature, which is another path. It's a complementary path.
Let's talk about nature. You obviously really love the ocean. You're living by the ocean in Mexico now.
Yeah, I'm addicted to paddleboarding and paddleboard surfing, so I have no choice but to live near the ocean. But yeah, it's a bit of an interesting town. It's a tourist town. It started out as a fishing village, and then it became known, for its surfing. And because it's a tourist town, it draws a lot of people who are on a very different vibration from the people who live here. The people who live here, the expats, the people who've been drawn to this place, many of them are healers. A lot of them are people who need healing as well. But there's a lot of yoga and a lot of alternative healers. And so I would call that a high vibration.
That's great. That's great.
And we get a lot of people who come here to drink for the week and lie on the beach because that's what they think a holiday is supposed to be about. And that's a lot of, as you know, alcohol is a very low vibration.
That's putting it lightly, Rafiq.
Yeah. Well, I have no trouble making a distinction between, the high vibration plant medicines, marijuana and other things, and the low vibration of a plant that's in its decaying or rotting state, which is where alcohol comes from.
Right.
One of the points I make in the book about drug use is that I never touched marijuana in university or high school, even though it was around me, like very close to me all the time, because I sensed intuitively that there were no shamans to initiate me into its use, to show me how to use it. I didn't have a sense that it was inherently bad. I just had a sense that I didn't know what to do with it. So, living with the Sufis, I saw one use of it, which is this ecstatic idea of experiencing the divine on an ecstatic level through trance and so on. But when you're out in nature, you're still in a trance. You can get into a trance state, especially through repetitive exercise or simply sitting and staring at nature or sitting and listening to nature can put you in a very a vibrational state that's harmonious with what's around you. And that's not the ecstatic divine. That's that calm, deep pool of divinity that we sink into in meditation. And so that's what I experience out on the water. And it's also a way to get away from the town, away from that collision of the dark energy and the light energy that's always happening here. And I just go out on the water and I go 5 kilometers up the coast and 5 kilometers back,
Great.
And the pelicans are there.
And so,
alongside.
For people that have not yet read your book, which is Days of Shock, Days of Wonder, just want to let people know that you did live with the Sufis, and that was in India. And why don't you tell us what was your tell us some of your best experiences with the Sufis. What did you learn? What were your takeaways?
Well, specifically to what the book talks about, I went there in search of someone who was living a mystical religion in practice, a religion that locates the divine inside. So I wanted to hook up with a Sufi mystic or a Hindu mystic, and by a series of beautiful chances, I met Baba Mubarak Ali Shah and lived with the Sufis for 3 months. But what I found a distinction between what I call in the book cultural religion and spiritual religion. And I discovered that most of the Sufis that I was with were cultural Sufis. They were practicing Sufism because it allowed them to fit in. It allowed them to belong. It's what everyone was doing around them. And many of them were poor. Many of them were orphans. So becoming part of the Sufi network allows you to be sheltered and fed and so on. And I saw that this was no different from what we would see in our own cultures. I grew up calling myself a Christian because I was born into Christianity. I used the language of Christianity. I used the metaphors of Christianity. But that's a cultural religion. And very few Sufis did I meet who were truly spiritual Sufis. So that was one takeaway. This distinction was writ large for me. And any illusions I had that in one part of the world, religion didn't have the same dichotomy was gone. It's very clearly there because, of course, it's there. We're all humans. Religions come out of our humanity. So there was that. But on a more personal level, apart from the reinforcement of coincidence and the reinforcement, there was that scene in the ashram where I saw myself in the future. I saw myself with this red turban on my head, and then later, this was before I met the Sufis, that scene came to be a reality when I saw that image in my camera. So these are moments that occur throughout the book, but some of them in India were more profound. They were of that level of, intensity. On that point, I don't mention this in the book, but I understand now that image that I saw in the meditation was an echo from the future, precisely because it was a photograph, because I had seen it so often in the future. So it had to have that resonance. And quantum physics tells us that past, present, and future happen simultaneously. So I'm not out in some mystical dimension here with this stuff. So India was a big reinforcer that we have to trust in that stuff. And I talk later in the book, once I'm in the trenches of 9/11 truth, how I'd lost the Sufi path of the heart, but I'd also lost those moments of synchronicity, those moments of remember. one of the greatest definitions for me of spirituality is that sense of being connected to something larger. And when we have those moments, it's like, oh yeah, and they all dried up. They all dried up after I when I was involved primarily in 9/11 Truth. But later in the book, I managed to combine the two of them.
Let's talk about that, yeah, because you did some really great work in Canada with a petition trying to get Parliament to look at 9/11 Truth. I know that the Parliament was dissolved right at the wrong time for you, and I know it seems kind of like it's such a struggle with this stuff. And sometimes the courts seem so corrupt in New York City. We've had a couple of ballot initiatives. They've gotten smacked down. We've had lawyers get censured for trying to take legal action on behalf of 9/11 victims like April Gallup. My friend, Attorney Bill Veal, got censured with huge fines and sanctioned. That's what it's called, sanctioned. It's a form of censure in which the court is telling you, we really don't want you to look into this. And, here's $30,000 in fines. So, but yeah, I thought that was one of the more inspiring parts of the book, because you were really, like you say, bringing spirituality into practice. You were doing 9/11 truth activism in a real world way, and you said that it's not just one ballot, not just one petition to get a new investigation in Canada, but you did it a couple of times. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I was only involved in the very first one, and when I launched that initiative in 2007 and was read into Parliament in 2008. The 9/11 Truth chapters in Canada haven't really been collaborating at all. So this petition was a way to bring them all together on a single project. And the Vancouver 9/11 Truth Society was super well organized. They were a registered society, and they very quickly whipped my petition into shape. And it was one of their members of Parliament in Vancouver who read it, had it read into Parliament. In any case, that was a big initiative, and it was accompanied by all kinds of street action. They had a half school bus that they drove across the country with live musicians doing street actions, and we did street actions for a year promoting the petition.
Yeah, can I just jump in and say that's really inspiring, that the idea of combining fun and political activism. It's almost like some of that was in Occupy Wall Street. Occupy Wall Street was also super fun, had fellowship and community, and was also hardcore political activism. So I was inspired by that school bus and the idea of, I guess you were saying like the Vancouver activists brought that in, right?
Yeah, and then on our side, they came all the way to Montreal, and we had a huge rally, and then we did a caravan for 5 days from Montreal to Ottawa, campgrounds every night, street actions every day, and you talk about that, bringing the music, well, it had that feeling of the 60s, right? Where people understood that our culture, our art, our music was probably the most universal way to communicate these spiritual ideas, because they are spiritual ideas.
Well, you want to know a secret? I own 2 electrical generators, and my friend Steven owns a giant old Trailways bus. It's like an empty shell. I have a dream, Rafiq, and I think you and I are going to make it apart. We're going to get Lo from Kaleidoscope Community Yoga in Portland. We're going to get Crazy Monk to come out of retirement in Fresno. He's a hip-hop artist. We're going to do the Truth Party tour, you and I together with a caravan but it's going to be international, U.S., Canada, and Mexico this time. It's going to be huge. The North American Union. Just yeah. So anyway, but I digress. Where were we?
Yeah, but what was this idea about?
We were talking about fun, Vancouver. We were talking about the Parliament petitions, investigations.
Yeah, but anyway, in the book, as you'll see, we learned Parliament was supposed to reconvene on the Monday following our rally in Ottawa that year in 2008 on the anniversary, and as we were marching out of Montreal on the Sunday prior. This is when Stephen Harper, the ex-Prime Minister of Canada, used to do these sorts of things on a Sunday afternoon. He announced that he was not reopening Parliament the following Monday. We, of course, didn't know that until we were all in Ottawa waiting for Parliament to reopen. And he would close Parliament when he thought that he could call a new election and get maybe a majority. He didn't get a majority in that case, but what I realized, and it's not there on the surface in my book, it's actually in the footnote or the endnote, is that the day that he won his new minority, but he won another mandate, he became Prime Minister again in October, was the very day that the 2008 recession peaked and hit the news and became an issue. So his real agenda, I believe, was to get back into power before the economy became an election issue again, and he did it precisely in that time frame. But we just got caught up in that, and we did follow up with them once they returned to power with letters, what's going on with our petition, and they just said it has no merit. We see no indication that there's a reason for a new investigation, and they just shut it aside. Part of why I did the petition was to test our democracy, to be able to say to people, my approach now, and I'm very clear about this in the latter part of the book, is that I don't have any desire to change our government, to confront our government, to give any of my creative energy to doing anything in respect to the system, okay? It's like George Carlin told us for years, the game is rigged, the system is fixed, okay? So it's all theater. We talked about that at the beginning. It's all theater. So my passion is now to create alternatives to the system so that anybody that wants to live differently, live authentically, have real experiences of connection with nature and with others through the heart, then they don't need to feel like there's nowhere they can turn to. There's lots of these communities around the world. There's lots of this happening, and I want to create that. Because if the system is rigged, and I believe it is, then the deep politician's agenda will continue to unfold regardless of what gets done on the political level. Now, I understand that politics can make a big difference way down at the community level. There are things that can happen that can affect the quality of people's daily lives. I get that. And I try to contribute to that quality of life in my community through the things that I do, such as taking people into my home, sheltering people, doing what I can with the money that life has entrusted to me to distribute, And but my bigger focus as a philosopher, as a thinker, as a person, is the geopolitical reality and what it means to live in a world that is so deeply antithetical to what we know our human desires, higher ideals truly are. It's about quality of experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, you're right. There's a deep level of political corruption. It can be overwhelming. I personally am trying to, and this is as a response to what you just said, I'm more interested in people like Mohandas Gandhi, the Mahatma, who was able to unite the greatness of the world's religions, Hinduism and Christianity especially, Buddhism, and the nonviolence, ahimsa, using the most radical and also the most universal. It's not just what you're proposing is a politics that I've practiced, but I'm trying these days personally to think about the Truth Party, a future possible political formation, as something that is optimistic and positive and universal, that says that nonviolence is already at the core of Christianity and Islam and Buddhism. And so therefore it seems to be a kind of a universal. And so therefore the USA and its neighbors could show a form of new, perhaps spiritual, political leadership. I don't know if the word spiritual is totally the right word, but like some sort of like hybrid between nonviolence and spirituality and politics as a way to say and as a way to say death to all illusions. I know that this is a controversial way of putting it, but a very clear, strong. You could say Zen. You could say punk. Rejection of delusion and illusion as a part of nonviolence. Nonviolence is satyagraha. It's soul force and it's truth force, according to the Sanskrit word. So, but speaking of death to all delusions, that was one of my tentative titles for the talk and the panel that you're going to be participating in. Thank you, by the way, for agreeing to come all the way from Mexico to Montreal to Toronto to New York for Left Forum 2016 with our friends Greg Hill and Mark Stein. And that's going to be a great panel. So why don't we talk a little bit about, is Death to All Delusions the most appropriate title?
Well, as I said in one of our emails, for me it sets up sets up a confrontational idea. It sounds like a battle cry, and I suggested that, yeah, it can often feel like we're doing battle with ourselves when we try to deal with our delusions. But maybe that's not the best way to think of it, right? And part of this comes from Four Arrows' influence on me, is that I've edited a lot of books in Indigenous studies for academic publishers, but I've also engaged in a lot of Indigenous practice with Four Arrows. And because I'm born into a Western culture that replicates the Western ideology around me all the time, I constantly have to keep rechecking myself to see if my thinking is hierarchical and divisive, or whether it's truly found a way to re-envision, to do that paradigm shift that Indigenous thinking requires, to see that we are truly part of an interconnected reality. So for me, the idea of death is something inside of me that needs to be killed. And I talked in my book about how I had wanted to, I think I wrote, ego fall away from me, that I might know divinity. So I had this idea that if I could just conquer my ego, if I could just quiet my ego, I would know more of my divinity. And in a sense, I do when I quiet my mind. But that kind of ignoring the ego, and thinking that the ego is the enemy, it actually just gave the ego strength, because all of its issues built up and built up and built up until I started to listen to it again. So part of my meditative practice now is to listen to the ego for the first 15, 20 minutes, like you listen to a child, and let it talk out all of its emotions and its lies. The ego's always lying to you because it wants drama and it wants this and it wants that. So once I get through all of that, then I quiet the mind. So all that to say that I thought maybe then, rather than death to all delusion, something like mastering all delusion. And delusion in the singular is like, delusion is my tool. Delusion is my thing that I can use. It's not something to be killed, but it's something to be mastered. So mastering all delusion. And if this panel were emphasizing, maybe an Indigenous approach, I would say maybe the warrior masters delusion. And the Indigenous idea of the warrior is, someone who's respectful and spiritual and, and so on and so forth, and generous and that idea of the warrior. But
Okay, that's good. No, I think we're going in a good direction here. It's funny. I told Mark Stein, otherwise known as Levi Asher. He's done some independent publishing as Levi Asher, and he's going back to his name of birth. I told him, it's funny, I'm a 9/11 Truth writer who's interested in spirituality, and so is Rafiq Robert Lewis, and so is Greg Hill, although he's not a writer, but he's very interested in 9/11 Truth. And we, all four of us, have an interest in this spirituality. I wanted Mark not to feel alienated by the 9/11 Truth stuff, and he said, no, I'm open to it. I'm open, I'm just not an advocate. And so it's interesting that this panel has a very strong love for truth and love for deep state politics, and yet I'm trying to make it a panel about meditation and prayer as revolutionary activities.
And it is revolutionary because, as all the 9/11 Truth websites promoted, that Gandhi ideal of be the change that you want to see.
Right. Practice.
Well, you can't be the change until you've gone inward. You can't. But when we're confronting things like 9/11, we're pulled outward, constantly pulled outward. So you have to have a meditative practice.
Right.
Or a way of getting some level of detachment. For some people, it's just a philosophy. For years, my Taoist philosophy was enough to keep me out of the mire, But as I became more engaged in these confrontational truth initiatives, I needed a concrete daily practice like meditation to keep me out of that quagmire that we get into.
So you meditate every day. Tell us more about your practice.
Well, I wake up every morning, and there was a guy at the ashram in India. He taught transcendental meditation in the Himalayas there, and we just crossed paths as he was heading back to the U.S. Poor guy had to shave his whole beard off. He didn't dare go back to the U.S. with a beard. He said in the morning after you wash your face and before you eat, you must sit. So every day I wake up and I do my ablutions and I wash my face and whatever, and then I sit. And as I said, the first part of it is not to be quiet, and not to get into that mindset that people get into. Oh, I'm not meditating right. Oh, I'm talking in my head. Oh. No, I have coffee and maybe a little smoke, some weed, which is a holdover from my Sufi practice. We would have chai in the morning and then a little bit of the Chillum. And then I settle into checking in and hearing what the mind is telling me. I sit half lotus while I do this. And then once the ego is more or less quiet, I do stretching, which is deep muscle, like Pilates-based stretching, because I'm paddling in the mornings and surfing. So I do all that. And then I go into breathing exercises, and I try to move the energy from the lower chakras up to the highest chakras through the body. And as I watch this happening, I like to think of them in terms of the elements: the earth, the water, fire, the air, the ether, the third eye, and then the crown. And eventually, once I start getting the energy up in there, I do something that Sufis do, and I've seen it show up in other practices, is you just touch the top of your mouth with the tip of your tongue. And you keep the energy focused there, and then you let that last breath go down, and then you're in. And that keeps the energy there, the tongue. And so then I just stay there and try to breathe. If the mind comes back in, you just watch it go. Watch it come and go. So eventually you get more and more quiet. There's a character in the Dharma Bums by Jack Kerouac. Jack's character in the book is all into I have to meditate more and longer and so on. And then he had this other friend, the one that runs off to Japan in the end. He could just sit down for 3 minutes and then come back up, and he was like ready to go. And some days I feel like that. Some days I'll just go into that place for 3 minutes, and or I'll do a listening meditation and just start to hear all the sounds around me that I'm not hearing. And then I'll go into a quiet place for a couple minutes, and then it's almost like the divine mind. It's a frequency on a dial that you've tuned on the radio dial. And once you're there, it's like, okay, I can carry this into the day now. I can let this be my dominant vibration rather than having my dominant vibration be the ego, which is where we mostly come from. Two of the people I love most in the world, Paul and Danny, they come up in the book. We had a really emotional experience recently that challenged a lot of the way that we were all going to handle our emotions. And for the first 3 days, I knew that the only contact I would have with them would be through my ego, and that I would probably get that back. And so I decided to wait until the ego had really stopped telling me lies. And one of the lies it was telling me was that they had intended to hurt me. Well, they hadn't intended to hurt me at all. And I knew that. Intuitively, I knew it. Intuitively. But the ego wanted the drama, or it wanted whatever recognition. So when it finally quieted down and I came to a place of what I was supposed to recognize out of this experience, I was able to go to them with that vibration, the more of the intuitive vibration. So all of these things are part of a meditative practice for me. And it's a practice that I've learned through pastiche, through circumstance, through meeting, ending up at the Buddhist retreat center in BC by accident again, and so on and so forth, right? So that's how I put it together.
Inshallah.
I want to get back to this distinction about, whether we want to change the world, by confronting it, or staying in the system, or building a political party like the Truth Party. I think the Truth Party is so important because there are many people that don't have the luxury to leave. I'm a freelance book editor. I have the luxury to leave and go live on a beach and use the internet. So if we're in the system, we need people like you who are alongside us who create these symbolic alternative truths, alternative to the system. I think the mistake can just be that it can get disheartening if we think that what we're creating is actually going to change the system, because if we say that, then we really haven't identified the true problem with the system. And the true problem with the system is that, these people with obscene amounts of power, because they've been making interest off of lending money that didn't exist for years and years and years, to the point where they've been able to buy the whole planet. I mean, if we can't just name that for what it is and know that all revolutions really that are going to be successful are simply going to strip the power away from the power. We know that historically. And as I said to Kevin Barrett in our interview, he was talking about spiritual religious teachings that tell us we do need to take up arms, we do need to go into battle. I'm a pacifist. My grandfather went to prison because he wouldn't fight in the First World War. Okay? That's where I'm coming from. But there are people in our culture. We have a culture that has monopolized guns and power in the hands of the police and the military and the government. Those police and military, they simply need to turn the weapons around at the government, at the war criminals. They need to that's their responsibility within any kind of a real revolution. And they don't need to fire them. They just need to recognize that they possess that power, you know? And the other thing, too, about trying to change the system is, frankly, I've learned this the hard way. You can't wake up people that don't want to be ruled. And many slaves need their slavery. Part of the human condition is to be overwhelmed by the responsibilities of being a person. And many people want somebody, a father figure, to make these choices for them, take care of these things for them. And so they get locked into their slavery. They may not even know it's a choice. But I can't presume to know another soul's business. I can't presume to tell a soul that this life it needs to wake up. Maybe this life it doesn't want to wake up. So that's another...
Well, from a pragmatic point of view, revolutions are usually successful when you have a cadre of enlightened beings. I don't want to come off as a complete Leninist, but if you have enough people able to educate enough other people, and through great websites and newspapers and YouTube videos, and able to say, like, hey, enlightenment is our birthright, divinity and Christ nature, Buddha nature is our birthright, and we don't have to live we don't have to live lives of excessive taxation, oppression, stripping of our rights, being oppressed by media spectacles which lead to more wars and genocide and torture, that we can actually free ourselves from these illusions, and it's part of our spiritual political praxis, then I think, like, the people, like Lenin said, we have to win enough people over to at least either being on our side, or win the middle class over to at least a healthy neutrality. And then, opportunities for true revolutionary change open up. And I know this is... Well, okay, listen, I'm checking the clock. We're at the 5:00 minute mark. Why don't we try to go another 5 minutes and then land the plane, land the paddleboard on the surf?
Okay. Well, I reference the novels of Pram Toer. Pram Toer was an Indonesian novelist, and I reference them in my book.
I remember, yes.
Yeah, and he gives an accounting of the history of Indonesia's overthrow of their colonizers, their colonial oppressors, and it's affected precisely by what you're talking about, through access to their own printing press, creating their own media, becoming the media that they needed to be, and they were successful. They overthrew their colonial dictators, but in the end, they just ended up with another dictatorial system. So what happened? Well, when you don't change the worldview of the people, the worldview just keeps getting imported into the next system. So if your worldview is inherently divisive or Western, you just get another divisive system. That's why I say at the end of my book that, if we want to change the system or fight the system, right, we have to change ourselves. We have to become holistic thinkers and perceivers to begin with. And then we have to look at a system that's if we're going to change it, people who become the next government or become the next, in a real revolutionary sense, if we have the fall of one government and the replacement of another. I like what they've done. Which country is it, Greenland or Iceland? They've just kicked the bankers out. I mean, that's a good place to start. Get rid of the central banks and kick the bankers out.
Iceland.
And then maybe we'll get different kinds of politicians later. But that's not a political act. It is a political act. But how do you get politicians to do it who are already working for the bankers? You see why I say it's not a political act? It's like Jesus kicking over the moneylenders' tables. He never ended money lending. He certainly didn't ignore it, but he wasn't ever able to end money lending. Human beings inherently live within the illusion that we're individuals first, and that feelings of connection are an aberration. The reality is the opposite. The underlying deeper meaning of everything is that we are interconnected, and that our individuality should just be a means to experience ourselves relationally, which makes love impossible. Without relationality, yeah.
Good. A couple of times recently in this conversation, I feel like we're really pointing the way forward to a new generation of activists, and rejuvenating those who are already dedicated to the struggle. And we're talking about all activists who are pro-peace, pro-love, anti-war, pro-truth. It seems to me more and more, especially here in New York City, the old divisions of the anti-war left and the 9/11 truth movement, those divisions are dissolving. They recently, one of our key activists, Les Jameson, was asked to speak at a major anti-war rally that was being thrown by, the old guard of Workers' World Party and RCP and all those, all those leftists who said they were going to have 1,000 people there, and they had more like 400. But anyway, but hey, it's good to see that there's still an anti-war left who's willing to have anti-war rallies during a Democratic administration. So, how do we want to end this in the last couple of minutes? I think we covered everything we wanted to cover on my list, which is good. Your book is called Days of Shock, Days of Wonder. You want to hold the book up again, maybe? I don't know. Just this is good television. I've read the book cover to cover. I endorse this book. I think it Four Arrows is right. It is a book to ignite a generation. It certainly ignited me and got me to think deeper. And I thank you for this interview too, because there's stuff that your point about non-hierarchical indigenous thinking was something that I felt was feeling it more in this talk than in the book. So yeah.
Good.
So this is like the companion video to the book now. So
it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, I could go into a lot of other stuff, but we can do this another time too.
We should, yeah. And for people in New York, Rafiq, Robert Lewis, will be at the Left Forum 2016, coming up this May. And what else are you doing for the book or for your career as a thinker, talker, surfer?
I have 3 other books that I want to write. They've been gestating for years and years and years. I've just been waiting till I was ready as a writer.
Yeah.
That was part of the process I went through in this book. So those books will come. But it's like Leonard Cohen said, for someone who had very little to say, I was certainly intent on saying it. The same thing over and over again in different ways.
That's beautiful. Yeah, there's some great Leonard Cohen quotes in this book, too. You're a true Canadian.
He's my mentor for sure.
Great.
I love you, brother. Thanks for everything.
Thank you. Love and peace to you, too, and blessings from the Almighty on you. This is a very special thing to do here on the eve of Easter. And so let's just give blessings and good energy out to everybody who is going to watch this video on YouTube, people who are in the truth movement, in the peace movement, in the anti-war movement, in the movement to have a new economics and a more just world. So blessings on them this season. And I think that's all I've got.
Bismillah.
Bismillah. Namu. 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 Amen.
Gracias por todo.
Okay, gracias. Tanara.